Could you everybody, Coach Rab here, and welcome to another Kilted Chess Noob episode. No, I'm not a chess coach, not even close. I'm a health and wellness coach that happens to love chess. But today's video is going to seem a bit coachy, and I'm going to share my 5 top tips for absolute beginners. Like people that have just taken a look at chess and be like, fancy giving this a go. Now, as a health and wellness coach, I'm always trying to give advice that improves your health and wellness, right? And one of the things is brain training. Okay, now there's great benefits to doing things that challenges the top 2 inches. Things like Sudoku, word puzzles can tick the box as well. Anything that gets you thinking to challenge those areas. And the key thing is you've got 2 main hemispheres of the brain, and you could argue that one side can be divided into logical and the other one emotional. Now, if you're experiencing high levels of stress through work for one reason or another, or life stress or whatever, financial worries or family stress, whatever it may be, that is usually because the emotional side of the brain is very, very triggered during those periods, and it's very, very hard to switch off. That's why doing things that challenge the logical side of the brain transfers everything across and helps to lower stress, which is one of the reasons I promote chess as a method of brain training. Sudoku would do the job, any other sort of puzzles, as I've just said, these sorts of things. Anything that gets the logical side of the brain fired up, so it takes the pressure off the emotional side, and just after 20 minutes, 30 minutes, you're like, oh, I feel slightly better. Now, it's not going to be a cure, but nonetheless, it will help you. Now, along my journey, as I said, I started off pretty useless. I'm now up to about 1,400, so long way to go. But I'm certainly better than I was. And what I've been trying to do with this channel is showcase my learning journey. Now, I don't know if my method of learning is the way to go. I just want to catalogue it for my own kind of mindset, if you like. But what I'm also trying to do is give a pathway. So if somebody has never played before but quite fancies it, then hopefully they jump on this channel and think, all right, I might give that a go. And that's the point of this whole video, is I want to showcase how some main things to get an absolute beginner up and running. Because the problem that we have with chess is that you might want to give it a go. You go in, you've got no clue what you're doing. You get absolutely stomped, and then you're like, I don't want to do that anymore. And you quit, right? Now, you'll never get any better if you just quit. But that being said, I understand that getting beaten's not fun. Now, remember that when you get beaten at chess, if you're an absolute beginner, the chances are the person that beat you has just played more games than you, right? It's as simple as that. And the only way to ever get better is to play more games. It's just experience. So you almost have to leave the ego at the door when it comes to it. Just say, you know what? I'm just going to give this a go, and I'm going to try and learn from my mistakes and not be in a rush to get amazing, because it does take time. So I'm going to take you through my 5 top tips. These are things that I've learned along the way that would definitely benefit an absolute beginner before you get into any sort of more complicated stuff like tactics and strategy. These 5 things should hopefully help you. Okay, first and foremost, learn the pieces. I know that sounds really, really simple, but there'll be a lot of people that don't fully understand. They maybe looked at chess once and understand kind of how they move, but they don't understand what the pieces are best used for. So I'm going to go through each of the pieces individually. Again, this is aimed at absolute beginners. So if you've played chess before and you know this stuff, fine, spin on. Or in fact, you know all this stuff anyway, so you don't even need this video. But this is aimed at absolute beginners, people that are maybe thinking, you know what, I might give this chess thing a go. So along your 2nd and 7th rank, you have your pawns. Now, they're your foot soldiers. They're worth 1 point each. Now, when they start off, they can either move 1 space, or they can jump 2 in their opening move, okay? But after that, they can only move 1. And pawns can attack diagonally anything that is at a 45-degree angle from their position. And quite often, they can get blocked in this case here, so they can't attack straight on like that. So they can only attack round. So these are sort of some that when you create things like pawn chains, which is a little bit more complicated, but that becomes a pawn chain, one protecting the other, okay? So the pawns, nice and simple, can either move 1 square or 2 squares on their opening move, and then they advance forward. They're the key for your defense. They protect other pieces, but they can only attack 1 square in any given direction. Now, I'll start from the inside and work out. So we have your king. Now, I'm just going to jump some pieces forward. Now, the king has got free range, but only moves 1 square at a time, okay? So it can only move 1 square ever. So it can move in any direction 1 square. So your king is your most valuable piece. If it gets checkmated, it's game over, right? It's done. It's very, very slow moving, and you typically you want to protect your king early on in the game. Later in the game, when you get into things like endgames and all this advanced stuff, you bring the king out. But typically speaking, you want to protect the king. Keep him hidden in the early stages of the game, and you will do much, much better. Next along to that, we've got the queen. Now, your queen, other than the king, is your most valuable piece. Your queen has got free range of motion, as many squares as she likes in every single direction. Did I miss some there? No, any direction. I didn't do a big enough arrow there. So she is very, very powerful. She is worth 9 points if you want to delve into the point side of things. She's the most valuable piece on the board. But again, much like the king, you don't want to bring her out too early, otherwise she becomes a target. And next along from that, you then have your bishops, which stand either side of your queen. You have a white squared bishop and a dark squared bishop. Now, the reason why that's quite important to point out is that the white squared bishop can only attack things on the white squares, and the dark squared bishop can only attack things on the dark squared, and they never switch throughout the game. So they attack diagonally as well. So if we bring this pawn out, this bishop can attack anything they're long range, kind of artillery on diagonals. So you can shuffle them around. You can, I can't do that, but if you can move them around, they can attack as many squares as they like on diagonals, but they need a clear line of sight. If something goes in its way, and I know that's attacking it, it's now blocked, so we'd have to either take or move in that position. So bishops are really, really good at long range stuff, and they prefer it if they're very powerful towards the end of the game when there's a lot more space on the board and they can control huge diagonals. So very, very important. The knight. Now, the knight is one of those pieces that if you've never really played chess, but you learn how the knight moves, you're very proud of yourself. You're like, great. Because the knight moves in L's, okay? Jumps in L's. It can jump around the board. I'll just use the other knights. You can, jump around the board in L shape. Now, knights themselves are really, really powerful if you can ever get them to the middle, okay? Now, this won't work because there's pawns in the way, but a knight in the middle has much bigger scope. Let's just take that, for example, because a knight in the middle covers so many more squares, okay? So sometimes your strategy might be to get your knight on, I'm going to try to cover as many directions as I can here. Sometimes your strategy can be to get your knight into what's known as an outpost. And if you can get one of those in the middle of the board where it's protected, it covers a lot of squares at once. Knights are also very powerful for a fork, but that's a tactic thing. I won't bore you too much with that just now. But they're very, very powerful pieces in that. Now, with a knight, with that being said, knights do not like to be on the edge of the board, ideally, unless you've got a particular strategy, because when they're on the edge of the board, they can only protect so many squares they're left, because as you can see, the other half of the reach is off the board. So if you ever get the knight pushed to the edge of the board, you're kind of like, oh, you just want to be careful with that. You want to be getting them as close to the middle as you can whilst keeping them safe. And then last but not least, we have the rooks. That's the castles on the end here. Now, rooks are very powerful pieces. They are worth 5/5. They run in all the way along straight lines along the rank or the file, so they can move around quite freely. We'll just keep things nice and simple, this wouldn't happen in the game, wouldn't be smart, but they can move around anywhere that you want, pretty much, and they attack everything that's in that line. Now, with rooks, as you go along, once you get them out, they are valuable pieces, but when you get them out, they're very, very powerful, but they work better when they're in a pair. Okay, so if you can get the other one out, I'm just throwing pieces around here because I'm not skilled enough to show you properly, but if you can get them working in a pair, which typically happens during development, which I'll go into in a moment, eventually you get the two rooks working in unison, whether that's, along the file or the rank, either way, they're going to be working really well because one supports the other and they become very, very dangerous. All right. So that's the basic pieces, how they work. If you've got that very straightforward knowledge, you can then start the game and you want to be thinking about, right, I know what the pieces do, I know where they're best suited, so I've got a good understanding to get me going. The next piece of advice I give is opening principles. Now that sounds like it's going to be quite advanced. You're like, oh, opening principles. But it's not really if you just stick to these three things I'm going to tell you. CDC. Center, develop, castle. Now, what that means, sometimes when people go into chess, you see plonkers like me talking about the openings they're learning. Now, remember, I'm still very much a noob, but I found that by learning certain openings, it allowed me to perform better, plus I like geeking out and that stuff. But to somebody who's just want to pick up the game and play, they don't want to spend time learning openings, and that's okay. But if you learn the principles of the opening, then you can play without rehearsing any particular opening. Now, what I mean by that is that, and I made this mistake as well, when you sit down to the board, you know how the pieces work. You're like, great, okay, the game's about to start. Which bit do I move, right? And then you know that once the game's going, you might perform better, but you don't know. So you push something. You're like, I'll just push this pawn here, right? And you know, whatever, this person then pushes this one out, right? And then you think, oh, okay, I'm going to jump this here, and then they bring this, and you might not see something coming, and before you know it, you've lost a valuable piece because you weren't quite paying attention. You don't know what pieces to work because you're just wanting to get into the game and you don't think it matters. Well, the reality is it does matter. Unless you're one of these top grandmasters that has a really specific strategy and knows how to cope, it's very important to stick to the opening principles. So CDC stands for Center, Develop, Castle. Now, what do we mean by that? Center. You want to attack the center. That's why a lot of the openings have you pushing either the D or the E pawn traditionally. There are some other openings, but you're attacking the center regardless. So you might push the E pawn, they bring one out. You might do, this is the Vienna opening when you bring the knight, again, protecting here. You're attacking the center because it's also, attacking that square. Your opponent might also attack the center because whoever controls the center has a huge advantage. Why? Because your kings at this point in the game are still in the center. So the board can be divided up into three sections, if you like. You've got the queen side, which is these three squares all the way down. Okay. You've got the center, which is these two, and then you've got the king side, right? So if you think of the board almost like a roulette thing with in threes. If you fight for the center, it's a very powerful thing to hold, and then it's up to you whether you can then fight for either side, king side or queen side. So first and foremost, you want to fight for the center and you move pieces accordingly, okay? Now, the next thing you want to consider is center, develop. So first of all, you're fighting for the center. That's your first goal, right off the bat. Fight for the center. Now, throughout the game, you don't have to keep fighting for the center, but off the bat, you want to, because if you don't fight for the center, let's just say you did a slightly white version of Carol Can, right? They might gain control of the center. Now, if your opponent does, they gain a lot of space and then they get an advantage on you. So if you can, try and fight for the center as best as possible. And the next thing is to develop your pieces. Now, your pieces are your back line, your rooks, your knights, your bishop, king, queen, well, so it's etc. Developing the king is castling, but we'll get to that. So you want to think about it. The more pieces you can develop, it means you've got more attacking possibilities. Now, yes, you want to be safe and do things with pawns, which we'll get to in things, but regardless, the more pieces you can bring to the party, the more of a powerful and dynamic approach you can have to the game, which is why certain openings that you learn, if you went down that route, would teach you they're kind of geared around getting pawns in the right place and getting pieces to the party. For example, if we had, this is known as the Scotch, it brings the knight into play. They'll bring this, bring here. They might attack, attack, attack. This is part of the Scotch opening. What else we might do if it does this? And it's all about bringing more and more pieces to the party. If you did this, developing as many pieces as possible. Just throwing things out here now. And then the last bit, once you've developed as many pieces, you then do the magic move castling. That's castle queenside, which is when the castle, the rook and the thingy swap. Oh, they don't quite swap places. The king goes to either the C1 square, or if it's going the other way, it ends up on the G1 square. So if it's castling kingside, for example, if we did this, I'm just moving squares for the sake of it. That's castling kingside. Now, you want to develop as many pieces as possible. You don't want to develop them all necessarily, but regardless, developing pieces and then castling. Now, the reason that you castle is if you just look at this position here, I'm just throwing pieces just to clear some space, right? Look at where the king is. It's defended by these three pawns. It's hidden in there. Even if the queen was to try, it can't go there, but if try to come in here, you can defend. There's lots of ways that you can then defend and be protected in that corner, okay? If they try and come down the middle, you've got your rooks both on the back row protecting you. So castling gets your king to safety behind a wall of three pawns usually. It's very, very important. Usually say try and castle by move 10 if possible. So center, you fight for the center with whatever pieces are appropriate. Develop as many pieces as you can in the opening. Don't be silly about it. Don't just throw things out there because we're going to come into that in a moment. But you want to develop as many pieces to the party and castle. Now, when you castle, look at what magic happens. You then usually link up the rooks. Now, as I said before, rooks work better in pairs. So right off the bat, you're in a good position. Well, not that position, but you're in a position to play on and do some damage. Okay, the next thing, and this is absolutely vital for beginners, is defend everything. And that's sometimes you play moves, you're like, oh, I want to get this out because the experts say develop pieces and blah, blah, blah. But if you leave pieces hanging, that means if a piece jumps into play wherever they move, but they've got nobody defending it, then suddenly that becomes a problem. Now, where that might happen is, let's just say we push the pawn, they match. Let's just say I throw this bishop away at there. Now, right now, there is no defenders for that bishop, right? So all of a sudden, if it becomes attacked, if I was to try and take, one of these would take back either the pawn, the knight, or even the other pawn, right? So from that position there, you want to try and make sure that all your pieces are protected. So, for example, in the Vienna opening, go something like this. You can bring the bishop out. They might secure here, and then you might secure now. From that position there, let's have a look at what we've got. That pawn is protected. This bishop is protected. These three pawns are protected. So the pieces that have all come out, it's quite a solid approach. Now, there's other things you can do. You could then, if I just move, let's just say they bring this out. We might bring the knight out again. Eyes on here. They might do this, and then you might castle, right? Now, look at that opening there, okay? That's very, very straightforward. You've got pawns out, you've got yourself castled, you've developed 1, 2, 3 pieces. Arguably, you've developed the king because you've castled them. Everything is protected. Even this knight here is protected, okay? This pawn is protected by the queen and protected by that pawn. This pawn is protected by there, and it's protected by the knight. Everything's got protection. So when you're making plays, try not to leave anything in the lurch. So if you do make a move and you're planning that piece to stay there, you want to then defend it on the next move or move it to somewhere that it's already defended. Because it's really, really important you do that, because if you don't, you're going to end up in a world that hurts. Now, for example, if we push this pawn, when we bring this bishop out, this gets eyes on the knight, but it's defended. See how it's already defended? So worst case, if something was to take it, you've then be able to take it back. Now, let's just assume, right? I mean, we wouldn't do this, but if it jumped in and we took that, and now we'd obviously have taken that first, but I'm just giving you an example. If that queen decided to jump out, guess what? It's almost like saying, you might take my piece, but you're going to get punished for it. So they don't get away with it. Whereas, let's take that back a bit. Let's say I put that there. Let's just say they move. I'm just doing hypothetical moves here. That's now vulnerable. If that queen then takes, they've just gobbled your bishop. It's got no punishment for doing so. And then you're like, oh, that sucks. So every move you make, you want to make sure you defend everything. Because if you defend everything, then you'll be playing what's called solid. Now, that's not going to guarantee a win, but it'll reduce losses big time. So whenever you're playing moves, just have a look, like what is going to back that up. And if there's nothing backing it up right off the bat, and assume it's not in direct danger, your next move, you want to be thinking, right, back that up. So for example, if this knight wasn't there and this jumped down, then imagine you could back up with a pawn, for example. Now, you wouldn't necessarily do that down that track, but you could do, right? Then you back up with the pawn. If this knight was not there, your very next move, you're then trying to defend it, okay? So defend everything, and that will go a long way to reducing losses. Now, moving on from my third tip, which was defend everything, my fourth tip is learn how to count attackers. And this is all very straightforward. An absolute beginner could do this. So you want to start counting the number of pieces that are attacking something. Now, let's just bring this all the way back. Okay, here, right? Okay. So let's just assume the bishop comes out. Let me just see the best way to do this. And this jumps forward. No, we'll need to say we did this, okay? So right off the bat, you start counting the attackers. Now, if you're on the attack, you need more attackers than there is defenders. Otherwise, you come off worse, right? So for example, in this position, this bishop is attacking my bishop, right? So there's one attacker, and there's on this side, there is one defender. Now, if that attacker was to take, I would then just take back. That's known as a trade. Now, later in the game, trades are okay. But typically speaking, a noob might be thinking, oh, well, I see something, I'm going to just attack it. You want to start counting attackers if you can. So at that point, there's no real point them taking, because like, well, you know, it's not necessarily going to pay dividends. Now, let's just say, for easiness sake, we push this. I move this there, and then we bring this down here. Now, again, we wouldn't do this because they would take the queen, right? But let's just assume you're a noob and you're playing it. Now we count the attackers. So we have one attacker attacking it. We also have two attackers. So we've got two attackers. But now we have a look at how many defenders do we have now? We've got 1, 2 defenders. So it's all of a sudden, it's like, well, it still wouldn't, oh, it's my shot, okay? It still wouldn't make sense for them to do, because they don't really gain anything. It's just a trade, okay? But with that being said, imagine we hadn't moved the queen in that position. We'd done something like this move, and then we brought the queen down. Again, ignore that, because you would just naturally take the queen. But let's just assume that was for easiness sake. Now, all of a sudden, when you're looking at that, they've just moved. Let's just say I do a silly move like that. Now, all of a sudden, they've got 2 attackers, okay, and only 1 defender. Okay. Now, in that position, if there's more attackers than defenders, you're going to win the exchange. So then they take back with the pawn, and then in comes the queen with a check. And that's quite dangerous. So it's a long, waffly way. Again, I'm no chess coach. I'm just telling you what I've learned. Learning to count the attackers versus the defenders. And if you're on the attack, you need more attackers. Defenders, you only really need the same amount of defenders. Now, if it's an important piece or an important square, because sometimes you defend a square, not just a piece, then you might be thinking, right, let's just add layers to this, get as many pieces defending it as possible. But ultimately, you want to start learning to count them. So here's an example. Let's just fight for the middle, okay? There's 1 attacker on there. There's 1 defender. Let's just say we push this out and they make another pawn chain, and all of a sudden we've got 2 attackers, 2 defenders. You see that? So it's like, well, it wouldn't be that great because these are pawns and these are pieces, but regardless, it's 2 and 2, so it's not going to come off. But if you were then able to get a 3rd piece into the mix, I'll just push this again, all of a sudden you've got 3 attackers, okay, and only 2 defenders. So let's just keep things simple. If we took, now we wouldn't take a pawn for this, but I'm just showing you, counting the attackers. Okay, so when you get into that, when you're looking at a position, assuming you've defended everything, you're like, right, okay, that's one of the tips I got, let's just defend everything, you're playing solid. Then when you see your opponent start to pile on pressure to a piece, you start going, right, how many attackers have they got? Oh, they've got 1 attacker, that's okay, it's got 1 defender. Oh, they've just added an attacker, right. Well, if they've added an attacker, I better add a defender if you can. Or be prepared for a contingency plan when they ultimately win that exchange. So making sure you learn how to count, and that will go a long way. And my last tip, so my 5th tip for absolute beginners, is don't blunder. Now, a blunder is when you make a move that just leaves something wide open and it gets gobbled up. It's a free piece. It's like when I was saying about the no defenders thing, right? I've made loads of blunders in my day. I typically make them when I'm playing the computer for some reason. I think it's because when I'm playing against the computer, any one of the bots, I play quickly. And I'm not good enough to play quickly, but I play quickly against the bot, because when you play, the computer plays instantly, which is great. I mean, when you're playing a human player, where you're playing online or in person over the board, the human player takes a bit of time. They're thinking, and while they're thinking to play their move, you're thinking about your own next move. But when you're playing the computer, it plays its move so quickly, that's when I typically blunder. So I'm going to try and give you an example. Okay, so in this position here, okay, it was black to move, and they made the blunder of moving their queen. Now, I suspect, so they moved their queen down, and I suspect what their goal was they were attacking this knight, which is in line with my king, and although it had a defender here, they were probably, I'm not quite sure, maybe they were thinking about just putting eyes on the king the same line, okay? But what they didn't realise where the blunder happens is my queen was on the same rank as them. Now, the problem is, well, their queen here has no other defenders. So it was very easy for me to swoop in and then gobble up that particular piece. So that is an example of a blunder. It's when you've moved something into place that's undefended and it just gets eaten. And then it's like, you've just given away a piece. Sometimes it happens when you move a piece and it leaves something wide open. So you might move a pawn forward and behind it is a valuable piece that you just didn't quite see. Now, Where I've blundered in the past, and again, if you're an absolute noob, is that I get so fixated on the little things that I've moved. I look at either what I'm attacking or what's just been attacked, and I sometimes don't look at the whole board. One of my friends who's then got into chess recently, she was saying that for her it's the diagonals, it's the bishops. They just don't see them. I used to struggle with the knights because the knights jump in L's, and I just sometimes didn't see it. I see it now, but I didn't used to see it. The point is that it's very, very important not to get, that whole closed vision. You don't focus in on a few squares. Remember, there's 64 squares on a chessboard. You don't want to focus on, 4 to 12 squares. You want to look at the whole board at all times. So the key to not blundering is having a look around the board before you play your move. Now, where this seems to occur with me a lot is when I'm doing the puzzles. Now, even if you don't want to play chess, it's very good to learn the chess, go onto chess.com and try the puzzles, right? Because the puzzles are excellent. They get the same brain going, and you don't get the same feeling of playing in a real game of getting beaten. The puzzles can be frustrating if you miss a boo-boo, and that's what I'm about to say. The problem I have with the puzzles is I see one route to victory, and I don't always look at the whole board. I get so fixated. And there's some classic puzzles where the solution is really straightforward. Like there's a queen attacking your queen, and there's some other things going on around their king. And you're too busy thinking, right, how do I checkmate the king? Not realising that you could just take their queen. You're too busy fixated on their king. There must be a checkmate here. And their queen is wide open. And of course, if you don't take their queen, you've failed it because their queen takes yours. So the things like that. So it's about looking round the board. Now, another guy whose course I did was called Nelson Lopez. Now, he's got Chess Vibes, which is a YouTube channel. Definitely recommend. And he had his Road to 1500 course, which I did, which was very, very good. Now, one of the things he said in that is that whenever, it's a good thing to play over in your head. Whenever your opponent plays a move, ask yourself, why did they go there? What are the threats? And that's quite good. So if you play that over in your head every time your opponent makes a move, why did they go there? What are the threats? So if you understand what they're trying to do in that position, then what you can do is you can say, right, okay, I understand what they're trying to do. Right, how could I counteract that? Or if their plan, if you don't feel threatened, if there's no direct threat that, you can continue on with your plan. But sometimes they might move a piece that directly attacks yours. You're like, oh, I better do something about this. So why did they move there? What are the threats? Those are two things that will go a long way to stopping you blundering. Taking your time before you make a move. Just look around the board. So if you plan a particular move, look around the board and just say, is there anything better? And what would be the outcome? If I moved this here, what would happen? So in this position, my opponent unfortunately didn't do that. They were probably fixating on whatever strategy they had. I mean, at this point, their bishop down this line was stopping me castling kingside. So maybe they were planning to attack this once they dispatched my knight. I'm not sure. When I saw that first move, interesting enough, I nearly blundered this when I first saw it, because when I saw the queen come down, I was too busy going, well, this is defended, that's defended. So I was looking at all this stuff. And I'm glad I took a breath, because if I didn't take a breath, I wouldn't notice that my queen could just gobble. And eventually I looked at the whole board and was like, oh, there we go. But again, you get so fixated on what just happened. Like, my opponent's just moved here. Right, that's protected. What are they trying to do? And I was even like, should I castle queenside? Will it still be safe if I can? And I was processing all this stuff. And then I was like, wait a minute, look at the whole board, Rab. And when I looked at the whole board, boom, queen cross, free queen, right? So that's the key thing. So I sometimes argue that you can blunder even on the offense. You can miss a piece just hanging, and that piece was hanging and I took it. So try not to blunder. Look at the whole board before you make a move and just see if there's anything better. Make sure that when you are making a move that you're not going to leave the piece hanging, that nothing's just going to gobble it. Are you able to then defend it soon after? Again, going with that tip. Knowing what all the pieces do in general. So if you understand what the pieces can do, if your knight's away on the outside, you want to try and get them closer to center. All these things will go a long way. So I hope those 5 tips helped. Again, these are aimed at absolute beginners. I'm not a chess coach. I'm just sharing the knowledge I've learned, and that's why I'm not great at teaching. I'm just trying to share the journey so far. Those were tips that have worked wonders for me. Specifically, the defend everything. That was key. The counter-attackers is also key. The don't blunder, I still blunder, but I blunder less. Just taking a breath to look around the board for something better, that's also key. There we are. So, centre, develop castle, defend everything, counter-attackers, avoid blunders, obviously learn how to do the pieces. give it a go. Hope you enjoyed this one, everybody, and thank you as always. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Bye-bye.